Okay? What's wrong with C? A lot of you didn't like C. Why not?
The always.
That was right. Always?
Always.
Well, you're in big trouble if it's not always. If you don't keep those concentrations right where they're supposed to be, that's disease and that leads to death. Homeostatic imbalances can cause arrhythmias, can cause neurons, the nervous system to shut down. Right? So what does sodium always look like? Always. Unless you are in a disease state of some kind. Really high outside and really low inside. And potassium, opposite. Really high in, really low out. And who keeps it this way? 24/7. Sodium potassium pumps. That is the job of sodium potassium pumps. To keep those concentration gradients normal, as they should be. I forget the exact numbers, but outside for sodium is something like 140 to 150 millimolar. And inside it's like 5 millimolar, something like that. And then potassium is the opposite. It's like 140 to 150, somewhere in there. Inside. And like 5 millimolar out. Always. How about calcium? Where is calcium always higher? In or out? Out. Most of the calcium in a cell is not free in the cytosol. Cytosolic calcium levels need to be kept extremely low because calcium in just about every cell acts as a signaling molecule. It triggers something to happen. So if, for example, you allowed calcium levels to elevate inside of a muscle cell, what would happen to that muscle cell?
Contract.
It would start contracting. How about a secretory cell? What would happen in an axon terminal if calcium levels inside were allowed to increase? The secretory cell would secrete. I mean, that is the trigger for exocytosis. Any cell that uses exocytosis uses calcium as the trigger. So it has to be kept extremely low inside, and I don't mean anywhere inside the cell, I mean in the cytosol. Free calcium in the cytosol. Now cells do have a ton of calcium inside of them, but where is it? It's in a storage container called endoplasmic reticulum, or if it's a muscle cell, sarcoplasmic reticulum. That's where you're going to find it, not free in the cytosol. If the membrane voltage is plus 65 millivolts, which way does sodium move across the membrane? It doesn't. If the voltage is plus 75, which way does it move? Out. If it's plus 55, which way does it move? In. As long as the value is more negative than the equilibrium potential, as long as it's less than plus 65, sodium's going to move in. And as a rule of thumb, we say sodium always moves into cells because we don't see membrane voltages that high. We don't see them near or above sodium's equilibrium potential. What's the highest voltage you've seen on a graph? The peak of an action potential. Plus 30, plus 35 millivolts, something like that. So that and anything less than that, anything more negative than that, sodium's going to go in. If the membrane is minus 94 millivolts, which way does potassium move? It doesn't. What if it's minus 100? Moves into the cell. What if it's minus 80? It moves out. So that transition point is minus 94. If you're more positive than minus 94, potassium leaves. If you're more negative than minus 94, potassium enters. But why do we say as a rule of thumb that potassium always leaves? Because we don't see voltages more negative than minus 94. So the typical range that we see, like on an action potential graph, is minus 90 at the low end plus 30, plus 35 at the high end. But experimentally, we could adjust the voltage however we want to actually force sodium to leave or to force potassium to enter a cell. Why would more sodium move across the membrane at minus 90 compared to plus 90?
It's farther away.
So at minus 90, you are closer or further from sodium's equilibrium potential? Further. What is sodium's equilibrium potential? Plus 65. So minus 90 is much further away from plus 65 than plus 90. And the rule is, the further you get from the equilibrium potential, the stronger the EC gradient becomes for that ion. How about for potassium? Stronger at minus 90 or plus 90? Where would you have more potassium movement across the membrane? Plus 90, because it's further from minus 94. The electrochemical gradient for sodium is 0 if the membrane potential is
Positive 65.
plus 65. So you need to know the equilibrium potentials for sodium and potassium. To help you remember calcium is 2 plus. It's a cation with 2 charge, and sodium is plus 1. Calcium's equilibrium potential is twice that of sodium's.
30.
Right? Sodium is about plus 65, and calcium is about plus 130. Done? Just keep doing that. It'll be a really fast quiz. Done? Which have neuromuscular junctions? Skeletal. Short refractory periods. 2 sources of calcium. Intercalated discs. T-tubules. Who has more? And how are they arranged in skeletal muscle alongside the SR? As triads. No triads in cardiomyocytes. You have T-tubules, you have SR, but not arranged into triads. Why don't we need triads in cardiomyocytes? You have another source of calcium. You don't have to release it from the triad to get the ball rolling, so to speak. You can bring some in from the ECF, use that calcium to open the remaining calcium channels on the SR. When you use calcium to open calcium channels and release more calcium, it's called calcium-induced calcium release. Positive feedback. now it's in. It's half done. Done? So here, permeability to calcium is,
Decreased.
and permeability to potassium. But then during repole, potassium permeability
Increases.
goes up, and calcium permeability goes down. And over here, what's responsible for this phase?
Sodium.
Increased permeability to sodium. What channel is responsible for this increased permeability?
Funny channels.
Voltage gated sodium channels. Increase in calcium permeability.
L-type calcium channels.
L-type voltage gated calcium channel. Decreased potassium.
Closure of IR.
Closure of the inward rectifier voltage gated potassium channels. They're all voltage gated, by the way. And the increase in PK.
Opening of the DR.
Opening of delayed rectifier voltage gated potassium channel.
Above the IR.
Followed by opening of IR, inward rectifier, voltage gated potassium channel. Plus, what else is open at this time?
Leak channels.
And at this time, and at this time. Leak channel. And what has reduced P calcium?
Closure of L-type.
Closure of the
L-type.
L-type, voltage gated calcium channel. At rest, which channel closes before the next action potential?
DR. Voltage rated.
So at first, DR, IR are both open for some amount of time, don't know how long during rest. They stay open, but then the DR is going to close. So you know, as we initiate the next action potential, you're starting with potassium leak channels and IR are both open. And of course, sodium leak channels as well. Done? Calcium and repolarization do not go together. You cannot use calcium to repolarize a membrane. If you open a channel that calcium can go through, which way is it going to go? Into the cell or out? In. How positive would the membrane voltage have to be to actually get calcium to move out instead of in?
Above positive 130.
Above 130 millivolts, above plus 130. We're not going to see that happen. Calcium's always coming in. Concentration gradient's directed in, the electrical gradient's directed in. Something else that doesn't go together. Drift represents dipole or repole? It's a type of dipole. It's a very slow, gradual dipole. Potassium and dipole never go together. What's the only thing you can do with potassium? Repolarize. Because when you open a channel for it, which way is it going to go? Always. Right? Unless we do something to the membrane to get the voltage under or more negative than minus 94, but we don't see that. We can use calcium to depolarize. We can use funny channels to depolarize, but they don't correspond to the right phases. So the early drift is due to which channels?
Voltage gated sodium channels.
The book calls them sodium channels, but they're not.
Funny channels.
They're funny channels. Followed by
T-type calcium.
T-type calcium. Then rapid depolarization is due to opening of L-type calcium. And then repolarization is due to,
Increased voltage gated potassium channels.
they're just called slow voltage gated potassium channels. And again, they're all voltage gated channels. So early drift is funny, late drift is T-type calcium, depolarization L-type calcium, repolarization potassium. Will drinking muscle milk give me bigger muscles? No? Why not? What do muscles need to get stronger?
Stress.
Stress.
That's gross. That's gross.
So we can cross off the muscle and just put milk.
Doesn't even taste good.
And it's not milk either. It's non-dairy protein. Here's the end of repul. What's the membrane voltage right here? Let's look at potassium. What does potassium's EC gradient look like at the end of repul when the membrane is minus 90 millivolts?
These are blue channels.
Is it really strong or really weak? Why is it so weak? It's really close to its equilibrium potential. What is the EC gradient for potassium at minus 94?
0.
0. So minus 90, we're really close to it. How about the EC gradient for sodium
Strong.
at minus 90 at the end of repul?
Strong.
Really, really strong. Because we're really far away from
Plus 65.
plus 65. So you need to know potassium's equilibrium potential minus 94. You need to know sodium's equilibrium potential plus 65. And the rule of thumb, the closer you get to an ion's equilibrium potential, the weaker the EC gradient. The further you get away from that value, the stronger the EC gradient. How about we change the statement and just change one word. Repul to depol. End of depolarization phase.
That's true.
Is it still false or is it now true? Change repolarization to depolarization.
True.
What is the value up here at the peak of depol? See, plus 30? So is that closer to plus 65 or minus 94?
Plus 65.
Right, so weak EC gradient for sodium, up at plus 30, but a really strong EC gradient for potassium. And remember, when we open these channels, we're going to use them when the EC gradients are strong. When are we opening the voltage-gated sodium channels? When the membrane's already close to plus 65? No, way down here at minus 90, where we have a really strong EC gradient. And that's why so much sodium rushes into the cell. When do we open the voltage-gated potassium channels? When we're way up here, when the membrane's depolarized, when it's further from minus 94, so that the EC gradient is really strong, so tons of potassium starts to leave the cell.